Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar about the user roles and the functions. It's an important topic, and I would like to tell that we have just updated the user roles and functions module, so we have a lot of things that has been changed, and we are going to discuss everything today in better detail, so you have a better understanding about the user roles, the functions, and the setup that you are going to employ. And let me just introduce myself. My name is Arsen. I'm a product manager at RigER. And we are going to discuss, as I said, the user roles today. Let's move on to the next slide. This is our social media links that you can follow us on. So if you have any questions or you have any need to see the news that we have, please join us on our social media channels, and we are actively presenting everything there. So the agenda for today is, as I already told, the user roles and the new function matrix. And the presenters today are myself and our support lead, Indre Kringilite. We're going to talk about the user roles and the function matrix, and then we are going to drill down for a more narrow scopes and up until each role that we have in the system, and explain what the role has, what access level does it have, what differences does it have compared to other roles, and how to implement everything. Then we are going to discuss the function setup, which is a completely different view and a completely different perspective from the user roles, because every single user role can have a different function setup. So you can extend the functionality of a role by just adding functions to that role. Then we are going to discuss some of the best practices that we can advise, and finish up and wrap up our webinar. So without any further ado, let me pass the microphone to our support lead, Indre, who will start talking about the user roles and the function matrix.
Thank you, Arsen. Hello, everyone. My name is Indre. I'm support technician here in RigER, and today I would like to introduce you with our new user roles and function matrix in RigER version 7.0. So in the next slide, you can see that user roles became more advanced, more organized, and more functional in the new release of RigER 7.0 Oklahoma City version. And we have different roles to segregate different functions in RigER to understand different rights in the system. And now you can find 5 different groups of the user roles. So these groups are sales, operations, purchases, HSE, and admin group. In each of this group, you can see different roles. Each role defines what procedures you can run in the system and which documents you are able to edit or just to read, which menu options are available for this specific role. So let's move to the next slide. And let's start with the sales group. So in this slide, you can see sales group, which includes salesperson, sales manager, accounts receivable roles, and each of these roles have predefined rights in RigER. For example, salesperson can create RSA documents, but in RSA journal, this user will be able to see only own RSAs and related documents for own RSAs. When, for example, the sales manager is able to see all RSA documents in the system and all related documents to them in the system. So from reports perspective, salesperson role allows to see only individual sales reports and individual prices reports in the system. So by selecting the specific role for the user, you can assign what level of access this user will have in the system. And another role in sales group is account receivable role. It's a previous accountant role in RigER system, and accounts receivable can see entire operations in the system, so all RSAs and all related documents, rental invoices, and sales invoices. And in the next slide, You can see the sales group matrix. So each role has specific rights of viewing, editing, or creating documents in the system, or generating specific reports in RigER system. Like, for example, in this slide, you can see that salesperson have full access, which means a green color for RSAs, but it has full access only for own RSAs. Salesperson has only rights to see price lists and price agreements, which represents the gray color, and the yellow color for account receivable, as you can see, represents the edit, delete, and view rights for these specific documents in the system. So the next group of the roles is operations. And this group includes dispatches, fleet managers, field technicians, and operation managers roles. For example, dispatcher functions are to assign tasks to technicians, control the jobs, track all available resources for the job, and they can manage rental units, manage field technician jobs. User with this role can see sales, oilfield rentals, general rentals, and safety modules in RigER, and all related documents with these modules. The next role, fleet manager, it is a new role in RigER. This manager controls the entire fleet, like internal processes with the inventory movements, bill of materials, assemblies, disposals, sales of the units, a lot of internal processes which organize the fleet. And the next role in RigER system is field technician. This role responsible mostly of the field jobs like tickets and safety documents. And then last role in this group is operation manager, which this role has read-only rights in the system, and this role differs from dispatcher role that this is a general role for the reports and dashboards of the operations. So in the next slide, you can see the operations group matrix for dispatcher, field technician, operations manager, and fleet manager role. And you can see which documents these roles can create, edit, or only just to view, only to just has read-only rights. So yes, different role can access only the different documents in the system. So the next slide, you can see the purchases group of the roles. And this group includes purchase requester, purchase manager, receiver, and account payable roles. And purchase requester and purchase manager was added to manage all the procedures of purchases workflow in RigER. These two roles were added to the system because we implemented Oilfield mobile purchases application in RigER, and these two roles defines who can request purchase order and who can generate and approve purchase order and proceed the purchases in the system. And the receiver role is for the user who will do all the bill of lading documents and receivings in the system. And sometimes the same person can be doing the job which applies for two different roles, like for example, receiver and account payable. So if you need, you can apply two roles for the same user in RigER, and this user will have all rights to proceed the work. So the next slide, you can see the purchases group matrix for purchase requester, purchase manager, and accounts payable roles. And also you can see what level of rights each of this role has for different documents. So you can see in legend that the green color means the user can create, edit, delete, and view the document. The yellow color has a limited access, edit, delete, and only view. And gray color means that user has only read, only rights to the document. And the white color, that means the document is hidden and user with this role don't have access to that particular document in the system. And the blue one, that user can see the document, but all the documents will be shown without prices, without discount columns, or the total amounts in the document. So let's move forward, and the next group of user roles is HR, safety, and admin. And HR group, HSCMs or group includes safety manager and HR manager roles, and admin group includes administrator role. Safety manager role is focusing mostly on the safety documents and reports, when HR manager managing and working on all HR documents and reports, and administrator manages users, administrator managers users, special admin transactions in RigER settings. So only users with admin with administrator role has a right to change the settings in RigER system. And in the next slide, you can see admin group matrices for safety manager, HR manager, and administrator role. As you can see, administrator role provides the ability to see all the documents in the system. And for other roles, only specific documents related with that role duties are available to see or to work on it for different users. So let's move further. And so how to set up user roles. So to set up any role in the system for a particular user, you must have an administrator rights in the RigER, and only users with this assigned administrator role can proceed these changes in RigER. So that means other roles doesn't have the ability to view even the settings menu in RigER, and can't do any changes in the system. So to set up a role for the user, you have go to user card and user properties, and there to select an appropriate role or roles for the user. So in the next slide, there is a second place where you can assign some specific functionalities for the users. So this is a big addition in RigER system, the function matrix. Function matrix gives a right to proceed a particular function to a particular user in RigER system. And I will discuss about this function matrix, how to set up it, and what means each of the options to select here a little bit later in this webinar. And now, just user role setup actually is a complex procedure in RigER, and this is why we have a role matrix and function matrix to define the functions which are assigned to the user with each of the roles in RigER system. Also, all these function matrix and role matrix details can be found in our knowledge base articles with the descriptions of what each of the role can do or cannot do in the system. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always reach us and we will explain what each of the role has, what rights each of the role has in the system, and what rights to set for specific users in the system. So let's move to the next topic and to the sales role setup. So I would like to demonstrate you how to set up a sales roles in RigER system and what are the main difference between um, the main two sales roles, so salesperson and sales manager. And in this slide, you can see two different user cards with in one of them selecting the salesperson role and another user has assigned the sales manager role. So the next slide, in the next slide, you can see the differences in the rights for these two roles. So the first different when you have assigned a sales manager or salesperson role is that not the full menu is seen, not the full RigER menu is seen for these users. So you can access only applicable for this role menu and documents. And the next difference between these two roles is that salesperson and sales manager, both they can create, edit, and view RSAs. Just salesperson can see only his her RSAs, own RSAs. When sales manager can see all the RSAs from all salespersons in the system. And same with other documents, sales manager can access and see all the related documents for these RSAs when the salesperson can see only related documents for his own RSAs in the system. So let's move to the next slide. And here you can see the difference in the full RigER menu when you select Oilfield Rentals section in RigER, and you can see that it's a smaller menu for salesperson when user has a salesperson right assigned. So as I mentioned previously, with each role, user has a different visibility of documents, a different visibility and access of different catalogs in the system. And by each role, you can access only the documents what requires by your job duties. Okay, and in this menu, you can see the difference in RSA journal. As I mentioned, sales manager can see the full list of all existing RSAs in the system and can access, read, edit, or create a new RSAs in the system. When the salesperson can see only its own RSA documents and don't see the RSAs created by another salesperson in the system. Same is with the other related documents like delivery tickets, field tickets, invoices, and so on. So now the RSA prices and approvals. So when a new RSA is added in the system and only user with assigned function of RSA approval can approve the RSA. And RSA approval function is a part of function matrix and it can be assigned to particular user in RigER. By default, this right should be assigned for sales manager, and same is with the prices. It is a part to add and edit the price in the system. It's a part of the function matrix. It's a separate functionality which can be assigned for particular use in the system, and only users with this assigned right in function matrix can make changes in the prices then. So in this screen, you can see the difference in available RSA statuses for sales manager role with assigned RSA approval function and the salesperson role without this functionality. And the sales manager has status approved in RSA status list. So when a new RSA is created, only the sales manager can approve it, and then the job can move on to the next steps. So now let me pass the presentation to Arsen, who will introduce you with the operation roles set up in RigER system.
Yes, thank you, Indra, for such a great insight to the user's roles new mechanism. And let's continue and talk about the next section of the user roles setup, which is the operational roles. So the operational roles consist of four major roles, which are the dispatcher, the fleet manager, the operations manager, and obviously the field technician. And the first one we are going to discuss and just see a glimpse on how to set up would be the dispatcher. And obviously, in most cases, the dispatcher is the most important person in the operations, and he controls everything starting from the ticket assignments and field technician assignments and controlling the jobs and ending up with the choosing the resources for the jobs and providing the services to the correct locations and the clients. So the dispatcher role is obviously a very important one, but we have very much simplified that role and brought to a selection of just one single role, just one single checkbox, which will allow you to grant all the permissions to the dispatcher so he can operate all of those documents and the jobs. So the dispatcher, what he does, he again has access to all the operational documents, which are the tickets, main tickets, and the inventory in the system. He has the sales OFR and GR menus and the safety menu added to his visibility list in the menu section. He has access to rental ticket types and the field ticket documents, the rental break notes, internal job tickets, repair cards, rig movements, inspections, etc. And he has access to more than 50 plus reports. So a very important role in the system, but yet again, simplified. And if, as Indra has described the function matrix, if you need to add some additional functionality to the dispatcher role, you can always use the function matrix and let's say add prices manipulation to and prices management to his role. Let's move on to the next role, which is the operation manager in our system. And again, just one single checkbox, but the operational manager has mostly read-only access as in most cases, the managerial roles require. He has only read-only access and he has access to all the most documents in the system and all the reports in the system. So the operation manager can go to the reports section, generate any kind of reports. He will have access to sales, oilfield rentals, general rentals, safety, HR purchases, and info menus, obviously. This excludes just a few, I think. And the reports he has access to are limited only by the revenue reports. So the only section of the reports that the operational manager would not have access to is the revenue reports in our system. Going ahead to the field technician, and the field technician is the other end of the operational cycle, as you can imagine, and again, very important role, but very simplified and very limited access. So by checking the field technician checkbox in our user settings role setup window, we just grant the field technician the ability to see the job tickets that are particularly assigned to him only. So he will be able to see only his tickets and nothing more in the system. He will use the oilfield rentals, general rentals, and the safety menus. The only documents he will have access to are the operational documents and safety documents, again, limited only by his access level that are assigned to him. He has access to 8 reports, which include the location report, the mileage, the field technician status history report, the list of field tickets, etc. And this is basically in most cases, the most essential part of the field technician role setup. Meaning if you do not really require to have anything else in the system, this checkbox, just checking this checkbox is ideal to have granted field technician abilities to a certain user. Moving on to the next role, which is the fleet manager. Now, as Indra has stated, fleet manager is a new role in our system, and the main intent of this role is to control the internal fleet operations, meaning he will control the internal inventory movements from one yard to another. He will create the bill of materials, he will create assemblies and manipulate assemblies, item disposals, etc. So the menus that the fleet manager has access to are only limited to the oilfield rentals and the general rentals. And the documents he has access to are mainly the internal documents, which are the intercompany transfer, the defective units list for the repair cars, the assembly list, the bill of materials, etc. Just the internal inventory or fleet documentation. The reports the fleet manager has access to, he has access, currently has access to 9 reports, which are the subrental reports, list of unit numbers, and the internal inventory other reports. Let's move forward to our field and items functions setups for the operation roles. Now, as Indra again has stated, the function matrix is a place that you can go and grant additional functionality to a particular user role. Meaning if you want to, let's say so, add an item management functionality to your operations manager role, and remember the operation manager role has only read-only access to the system, you can come here, you can select the items checkbox, and it will grant the operation manager the item management functions, meaning he will be able to go ahead into the items catalog in our system. He can create, edit, delete, and do any other operations connected with all the items in the system, be it the rental units, be it the consumables, be it services, or anything else. So the function matrix, again, is a place to go to add additional functionality to particular users in your system. And for the operations case, the function matrix grants the ability to have item management, the departments management, which also happen to be the shops or yards that you have employed, the price management ability, and the ability to manage the inspection templates and inspection cards. So these are basically the 4 functionalities that can be extended to for the operational roles. Okay, so let's move on to other section, the third section of our role setup, which would be the purchase roles. Now, the purchase roles, again, are heavily revised, and 2 of them have been added recently, and also are very highly tied to our mobile purchases application. And the purchases role are the main intent basically of these roles is just to manipulate the purchases in the system and manage everything that is connected to the purchases. So let's see. These are the 3 windows that you can set up a particular purchase role, be it the purchase requester or a purchase manager or the accounts payable. And I want you to focus your attention on one thing, that the role does not necessarily define the scope of the operations of a particular user. And in this case, I will just bring the example of the accounts payable, which is under the purchases role in our system, and the accounts receivable, as Indra has talked about, which is under the sales role setup. So basically these 2 roles, if selected together, grant the accountant ability in the system. So if you want to give a full accountant role permissions to a particular user, let's say you have only one accountant in your organization who deals both with accounts payable and the accounts receivable, you are going just to select 2 of these roles, and these are going to fully fulfill the scope of his operations. But again, one of them is under the purchases roles group, and the other one is located on the sales roles group. So the scope is not necessarily defined by the particular user role in our system. Now, these are the actual access level that our purchase role have as of right now. So let's go over it. The purchase requester has access only to request a purchase order in our system. Now, the only menu he would see would be the purchases menu. The documents, again, is only the PO request, purchase order request, and he has access only to two reports, which are the purchase reports. The purchase manager, on the other hand, can generate a purchase order. He can also generate a bill of materials. He can also generate a purchase invoice particularly. And the menu, again, the only menu, well, all of these roles in the purchase role setup, the only menu that they have access to is the purchases menu. So the purchase manager is no exception, but the documents that he has access to are the purchase order request, the purchase order, the bill of lading, the purchase invoice, fast purchase mechanism document that we have in our system, subrental agreements, rental tickets, etc. And he has access to 7 purchase reports as of right now, which are basically all the purchase reports that we have in the system. And on the other hand, the accounts payable, this role is not necessarily limited to the purchase mechanism. Again, you can grant additional functionality to this particular user that has the role of accounts payable. But as of default setup, the accounts payable role has the ability to generate a purchase invoice. He again has access to purchases menu, and the documents he can manipulate or manage are the purchase order request, the purchase order, well, basically the same as the purchase manager documents, and the reports are limited only to the subrental reports. So they are not included in the purchase accounts payable reports list. Moving on to our next roles group setup, which are the HR and the safety particular roles, manager roles. And to highly simplify everything in the system, we just have 2 roles that represent these 2 particular sections. The HR, again, is represented with the HR manager role, and the safety correspondingly is represented by the safety manager role. Going ahead, we will see the access levels for each particular user role. So HR manager, only access to all the HR documents in the system. Menus that he can see in his particular setup would be the HR, Oilfield Rentals, and General Rentals. He can also have by default access to several operational documents, because usually in operations we also track the field technician hours and the crew hours and the time. So the HR will need that information and he can have access to it. And he has also access to several reports, which can be the employee and also oilfield service hours reports, the all quantity of the HR reports, and the tech skill and qualification reports in our system. On the other hand, the safety manager has access only to the safety documents and reports in the system. The menus he will see would be the safety, the oilfield rentals, and general rentals. And he can also have access to the operational documents by default, because again, we will need to have safety checklists in the operational process. So the safety manager role will allow the operational users to use and utilize those checklists and safety documents. And the reports that the safety manager will have access to are 8 safety reports and the technical skill and qualification reports that we have in our system. Last but not least, the most powerful but yet fully and heavily revised role in our system, which is the administrator role. Now, in our previous versions of RigER prior to 7.0, our administrator role was basically able to do anything and had access to everything by default. Now that has changed, and the administrator role by default as of right now has only access to settings of the RigER system, the configurational setup, and some only heavily administrative actions that can be performed in the system. Now, frankly, if you are an administrator and you have these roles, you can go ahead into the user settings and add everything else to yourself and grant yourself a full access to the system. However, narrowing it down only to the settings and the configuration side of the system is not only simplifying things, but also making it way more secure. So the administrator role is now only necessary to configure the system. And if you want to have access to other aspects of the system and think about granting yourself the administrative role as it was in the previous setups, it's not going to work. So we will need to ask our administrator in that case to grant yourself or someone else in your system certain abilities or certain roles to manipulate with certain scopes of operations. Now, the administrator in our system, what he can do again, he will manage the user setup. He will do specific setting and configuration. And the only menus he will by default have access to would be the settings and the info. And obviously, all the documents and reports are accessible by him, but still we will need to enable certain roles for those menus concerning that roles to be available for the administrator to access all of those documents. And alongside the function matrix, developed function matrix that we have in the system, and alongside with the particular user card that will allow you to set up the user permissions and the roles, we have developed another mechanism that will allow you to manipulate all of your user roles at once. So if you go open the function matrix screen and select the roles matrix, it will represent all the users that you have currently in your system, and you can see that the first horizontal line represents all our user roles that we have in the system, that we have employed in the system as of right now. So by just checking the checkbox, the corresponding checkbox next to the user that you want to grant certain abilities, that will be enough to set the current permission to that user. So let me pass the microphone back to Indra, and she will speak about the function setup in more detail.
Thank you, Arsen. So let's move and let's dive deeper with the function matrix in the RigER system. So in the next slides, you can see the function matrix. So as I mentioned previously, the function matrix gives a right to proceed a particular function to a particular user in RigER system. For example, not all users can work with items in RigER system, like to create or edit existing items or rental units or unit numbers. And to give the rights to create or edit items and unit numbers in RigER, we have to assign this right in function matrix. These functions are organized as a separate matrix in the system, and just to prevent the situations when, for example, too many users can have same function, the right to do same work in the system and cause some mess later. So for example, usually we recommend having 2-3 users with the right in the system which can to add new items, new rental units in the system. And same approach is with clients or departments creation in the system. So for example, another functionality is RigER approval, and if user does not have assigned this right, the RigER status approved will be not available to set in RigER for the user. And in the next slide, in this slide, you can see the description, short description of each additional functionalities, what you can assign for any user in the RigER system. And for example, items, so this functionality provides the right to create and edit items and unit numbers in the system. Clients provides the functionality to create and edit clients. Departments, it's for creating and editing departments in the system. A RigER approval provides adds a write function to approve RSAs, PO approval, to approve purchase orders, and invoice generation. If you assign this function for a particular user, so that this user can generate invoices and sales invoices in RigER system. Then the price function allows to create, edit prices, price list, and price agreements. And the taxes allows to create and edit taxes in the system. The next function is inspection templates. So only particular users which assigned function of inspection templates can create and edit inspection templates in RigER system. And the next one is submit invoices. So this function allows the user to have a menu where he can to export invoices to account software when there is an integration between RigER and QuickBooks sales or other account software. And export data function allows user to submit invoices to OilDex or Open Invoice System, and invoice status change function allows to change invoice statuses. So there are a lot of changes in a new RigER version. And for example, previously any user in the system was able to change invoice document status, and now only particular users with assigned functionality can do this. So even when your RigER system, for example, for existing clients, if your RigER system was moved to a new RigER release and you can't assign this, you can't change invoice statuses, that means you need to assign a particular function in function matters for the user to do this. So this is the main functionalities and the main roles what we have in RigER system. So let me pass now the microphone to Arsen.
Yes, thank you, Indra. And just to add on this functional user setup, we are updating our clients to a new version, version 7.0, but it's not a one-day update. It's a scheduled update for every single client. And if you have not yet been updated to the latest version, you will receive an email notifying you when the update will become effective. Also, you will have instructions and some information in that emails. And after the update, we are going to contact with you and either do a call or do a email session and describe how in your case will be the best setup of the user roles. So please follow those emails, and if you have any questions, again, please contact us so we can make everything more effective. And now let's talk about the best practices of the user roles and function setup. I mean, the best practices are applicable not only to us, but every single system that has multiple users with multiple access levels. So we are no exception in that case, but in our case, we have a sophisticated picture in mind. So with that said, let's discuss a few points that will make the best practices choices far more applicable in our cases. So the main thing would be just to keep it simple. And by keeping it simple, we mean just to assign the particular role that is needed and nothing more, or the particular functionality in the function matrix and nothing more. This will not only be simple for the user to see only things that that he or she has to deal with on his daily basis, but will also secure the system, meaning that we will not grant additional access and we will not create an additional place for a human error. So by assigning only the specific scope of operations to a single user, you will limit the error rate, let's say so, and everything bad that can happen to the particular role setup in the system. The next advice would be just to use the function matrix very wisely, because the function matrix grants additional functionality to basically every single role that we have in the system. Some of the roles will not be able to use that functionality unless they are escalated to another role that employs the menus for that particular functionality to be available. But the function matrix still will grant those abilities to the particular user. So if you are going to grant additional functionality to a particular role and you have any questions in mind or you are in doubt, please contact us and we will always advise which would be the best case scenario for the actual process that you want to achieve. So the function matrix again will grant possibilities and additional functions to a particular role, but not necessarily it's going to work the way you want to or the way you intend to. So just contact us and we will help in that case. And the last thing would be just to keep your users list and their user roles updated in the system. Meaning if you hire a new person or you fire an old employee, you just either remove them from the system or disable their login and password. You just disable their roles in the system. And by keeping this list and the roles updated in the system, you will always have the chance to have the fresh picture, and in case you need some log information or some access information, you can always rely on the updated list and the logs that we have in the system. So the time has come for us to discuss some and answer some of your questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. When you go in your window in the Q&A section, you can just type your question there and you can and we can answer those questions. And I can see that we already have a couple of questions in here. And the first one is from Jason Barker. The question is there a limit of how many roles to assign to one user? Well, as I said, the best practice would be to keep everything simple and assign only the roles that are needed for that particular scope. But yeah, there is no limit to assign on how many roles you can assign to that particular user, meaning that currently we have, 13 or 14 roles in the system. You can basically create a single user and assign all the roles to that particular user. So just give him, let's say, the previous administrative access to RigER, which is like the God mode in RigER, that you can do everything and see everything and have access to everything. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. And I can see that we have another question from Ray Taylor. Can you use the function matrix to apply additional restrictions for users should the predefined role grant too much access for their specific role within the organization? Well, the short answer is no, Ray, because the function matrix is not used to restrict access. Rather, it's already restricted. It grants the access to already restricted functionality. And when designing and creating the current user role setup, we had a lot of things to think about and to understand the precise limitations of each role that we should employ. So we've tried our best to limit everything to the particular scope, but if somehow you need to limit access to even a narrower scope, please contact us and we can discuss that and see what we can do for you in that case. Okay, so moving on to our next question. This is from Peter Brimelich. I believe I pronounced your last name correctly, Peter. If not, I'm sorry. Okay, how to choose the correct roles to assign? Well, again, it depends. It all depends on the scope of operations of the user that you are assigning the roles to. If you want to grant a field technician role to your field tech guy, you can just select the field technician role. If you want to grant, let's say, a dispatcher and a field technician role to your field tech guy, you do not necessarily need to add the field technician to his let's say setup, you just select both of those roles in the system, and you grant the roles to that particular assignment. But again, you just need to understand the scope of operations, and you can also see the roles descriptions that we have and compare them and understand whichever suits your needs, and just to select those roles. And I can see that we have one more question. This is from Shannon. Where can I find the description of all these roles? Yeah, and I'm gonna ask Indra to answer this question because she can do it way more better than me. So Indra, please.
Yes, so all the description, not only about the roles, but about all the functionalities in our RigER system, how to use it, how to set up it, you can find in our knowledge base. And you can always send questions to our support, and we will be happy to provide the answers and guidance how to set up the roles, and we will provide the links to knowledge base articles with the correct articles for your questions, and we will answer all your questions related with RigER system.
Yes, thank you, Indra. And I don't see any more questions as of right now. So, oh, I'm sorry, we just got a new one. Again, from Ray Taylor. Is there a hierarchy involved with the user roles when granting specific dashboard setups and available read-write abilities, or does the greater privilege of the two or more roles supersede the available access? Yes, this is a very, very good question. And to answer this, let's keep in mind the operational roles and speak about well, let's keep in mind the sales roles because it's simpler, and speak about the sales manager and the salesperson roles. Now, they both have access to RSAs. They both have access to certain documents and certain reports. On the one hand, the salesperson has access only to his assigned RSAs or his created RSAs. On the other hand, the sales manager has access to all the RSAs in the system, and he can assign certain documents to certain sales people, say certain sales persons, let's say so. And hierarchically, that works in the way that if you want to grant both abilities to one person, one user in the system, you can just select the sales manager role, and it will also involve the salesperson roles and the permissions in the system. So I hope this answered your question. Okay, we do not have any more questions as of right now, so couple things to add to our demo today, to our presentation today. If you have any questions or you would like to see more detailed description of our product, you can always book a demo on your website, and or you can call us, or you can email us, and you can see that information, contact information on your screen. Or you can basically go to our websites and just click on a book a demo button, and it will allow you to book a demo for yourself, and we can present the product in more detail and answer a lot more questions that you might have. So today's webinar is going to its end, but we will do another webinar on our rental unit statuses next Thursday. So you can please join us on next Thursday for our webinar, and it will be our new rental unit statuses, and we have a lot more new statuses and revised statuses in our new version. So it's going to be a very interesting and very informative webinar session. So on this note, I would like to thank you all for attending our webinar, and we will see you next time, next Thursday. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.